Hello and welcome. You're watching QTV and you are watching The Week in Review, our weekly trawl through 10 of the big stories from the week just gone by. And as usual, to go through them with me, I have a friend and colleague, Mr. Mamodu Mboj. Mr. Mboj, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Ali.
And I've given you a kind of indication of what the show is all about. We go through 10 of the big stories from the week just gone by and we delve into them after we've seen a clip or two. After you've seen one, you'll get the hang of it. So this week, a very, very big week in Gambia, in politics and in sport. But we'll kick off with politics first because His Excellency President Adama Barrow was inaugurated for a second time. Have a look.
Today, we can comfortably conclude that my election for another 5 years is a vote of confidence in my government, a vote of acknowledgement of my achievements, a vote of endorsement of the path we have undertaken to follow, and a vote of acceptance of the democratic principles and values we stand for. It is also a vote of appreciation of who we are as a people and how we have branded ourselves, as well as vote of willingness of the people to come together and work together to pursue our dreams and aspirations.
You heard His Excellency the President there, Mr. Mboj. You and I listened to that speech. It was a long speech, 20 minutes plus, nearly 25, I think. What was your take on it, and were there particular things that jumped out at you from that speech?
A good deal.
It was wide-ranging.
Yes, yes. It was wide-ranging. Yes, of course, he started with speech. He wasn't a boast as such, but really having to reiterate what he had been saying the whole time. He won fairly, squarely, all his observation missions said it, and the legitimacy, all that established, and the popularity, given the voter turnout.
Yes.
That was
indeed.
key, and then what he won, the margin of victory, and all the rest of it. Fine. So now he said, well, 60% of the NDP, National Development Plan, either successful or on track.
Yes. That made you delve into it a bit more.
Yes, it makes you wonder what did they do? How did they come to that figure? So we'll have to fact check that. Right?
I think we will have to, yes.
Yes, and also now a slightly adapted NDP, which would be more green focused.
That's right, yes.
From 2023, 2027, they call it. So we'll see how that looks in practice.
Yes, he also talked about being kind of youth-led.
Yes.
Which will be interesting to see, because for the moment he's retained his cabinet until he appoints a new cabinet before the end of the week. That's just about to come. But when I heard youth-led, I assume he meant youth-led policies, or policies targeting the youth particularly.
That sort of thing, because in the speech as well, he said that the interventions that he had put in regarding youth and women, they've been successful. He mentioned a few. So now we'll see what's going to happen. I mean, he comes up with the Vision 2050. You know, we had Vision 2020. He comes up with the Vision 2050. And one of the targets is for what? Rice self-sufficiency, food security.
It's quite a bold target. And for those who are too young to know, this was a target that was once proposed by Dawda Jawara all those years ago, and in 1969 Gambia thought they were getting close to it, but we're even further away now than we were then, so it's really quite a bold statement to make.
Absolutely, because in many ways we are also always subject to the weather. When you don't have a good rainy season, you see, it can mess you up. So that's it. So given all of that, given that context, one of the other points when he said that now they have put in certain economic measures, making the economy now viable, to generate income for our own projects rather than depending on outside. We all know how much aid has been coming in here.
Yes, quite.
So that would be a tall order, one feels. So we'll see how he's going to do that. He's made some very interesting, he's saying all the right things.
Yes, quite. I mean, because you talked about aid there, because we talk about aid in the kind of traditional sense of this sort of big national agencies, but also the aid that's coming from Gambians in the form of remittances.
Absolutely.
So you have that, and you wonder how, when we all know the impact of COVID on tourism, which is sort of a huge contributory factor to our GDP, that is something where we need to think again. But I didn't get the sense that maybe one shouldn't expect it in this kind of speech, but that a lot of thought had been expended in terms of saying we need to completely change the sort of economic dependency on things like tourism.
Oh, absolutely, yes. But you do not get that sense.
No.
We've talked about it time and time again. When the Minister of Tourism a few times in the past had come out and say, oh, we're going to invest in this, we're going to invest in that. Then we keep saying, no, please don't do that. Give it to the private sector. They will invest in it. That money, spend it somewhere else. This is one of the areas where you can do that sort of thing. And that is it. And even with the diaspora,
yes,
a kind of diaspora fund. Already we know that now diaspora has the money, remittances have outstripped aid for indirect investment and all sorts of things.
And far outstripped.
And far outstripped. So that's it. How do we give it a sort of developmental structure?
Indeed,
as
yes.
it were.
That's
I
quite
think
a
that would be a challenge.
Sure.
But the resources are there.
There's there. Yeah.
Challenges are there to be conquered.
Quite.
Absolutely, the resources are there. You have to use it.
And so if you had to give a kind of overall mood as how you saw it, what would, or marks out of 10 in terms of what he promised and so what would you give?
And overall, the pomp and everything, to my mind, it was appropriate.
Yes, it was.
I mean, the symbols matter.
They do.
We all know the symbolism of it. There's not much substance. But these things, they matter. And the fact that the guests that we had, I'm sure we're going to come to that story.
We're about to go to that,
That in itself also gives it an extra cluster.
Sure.
Yeah, extra class.
Thank you for that. But as we've said there, lots promised, and I guess having done that, we're all going to be keeping an eagle eye on what is going to be delivered over the next 5 years. But thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. And then, as we've just hinted at, there were several very, very, very important guests who came to the party. Have a look.
President-elect Adama Barrow on Tuesday afternoon received the presidents of Togo, Mauritania, Sierra Leone, Guinea-Bissau and Ghana ahead of his inauguration on Wednesday 19 January at the Independence Stadium in Bakau, while the Vice President Dr. Assirou Touré, on behalf of President Barrow, on Wednesday morning received the presidents of Senegal, Nigeria and Liberia, who are all in the country at the invitation of their host. The visiting heads of states are Their Excellencies President Faure Gnassingbe Dema of Togo, Mohamed Ould Al Gussein of Mauritania, Macky Sall of Senegal, Umaru Sissoco Embalo of Guinea-Bissau, Mohamed Buhari of Nigeria, Nana Addo Akufo-Addo of Ghana, George Weah of Liberia, and Julius Maada Bio of Sierra Leone. His Excellency President Julius Maada Bio of Sierra Leone is accompanied by his wife, First Lady Madam Fatima Bio, who is a Gambian, while the rest are accompanied by their cabinet ministers and other top government officials.
Cabinet ministers, other top government officials, but of course Maada Bio came with his wife, who is Gambian. But Mr. Mboj, 8 African heads of state, so quite a gathering and quite a statement, particularly in the view of what's happening in our sub-region.
Absolutely. They were here to celebrate an ECOWAS success story.
Indeed.
In many ways.
Yeah.
That's why they all came. Because I think that getting rid of Yahya Jammeh, of course, we did the difficult bit. We voted him out. But we also know that perhaps it would have been, he wouldn't have left if he didn't have that threat of force.
Sure.
So in the end, that was a key element in that. And you could see how ECOWAS leaders, how many came during the negotiations,
Indeed.
how many came and left. And you could also see how they bent over backwards to accommodate every caprice that he asked for.
That's right.
So they wanted to do it peacefully.
Yes, they did.
Right? That's it. So they had helped us transition from that dictatorship to a democracy.
And this is it, because I mentioned it to our colleague Choi, saying essentially this was them giving a kind of stamp of approval for a democratic transition, which, when the first one happened, when Barrow was inaugurated the first time, nobody was sure how it would go and how it would develop. But now, since then, we've now gone through another successful election, and I think this was them giving their seal of approval.
Absolutely, a success story. I was talking to some of these journalists the other day. I said, I wonder, does this sort of mean that there's a core solidarity, consensus, convergence of vision? They seem to be
well, you know, I would almost go along with that until one just goes back a week back when they said they should close borders against Mali, and Guinea-Conakry said, no, we're not going to do that. Of course, they've also got a military regime at the moment, so perhaps it's not surprising. But all the other ECOWAS, because we were told it was unanimous, and then exactly a day later, Guinea-Conakry came out and said, no, we won't do it because the ordinary people will suffer. And so, yes, it'd be nice to kind of talk about these in terms of solidarity and so on. But I think there are always the ones, you know, there's always a tiny chink through which, you know, somebody can kind of drive a wedge, and then the whole thing, you know, ends up sort of dismantling.
No, absolutely, there would always be friction. Maybe what one is hoping for is we agree to disagree.
Yes.
The disagreements will always come. You even see it in the EU. That sort of thing will always come.
Of course.
But whether you have the mechanisms to deal with it without it spreading to infect every other area, let's just keep the problem to what it is.
Yes.
Without infecting other areas. Yeah. So that is really what you can do. You can never have complete unanimity in politics. What does that mean?
Yeah.
So it's an ebb and flow.
Sure.
that sort of
But
thing.
a good sign nonetheless.
So generally, I feel that, generally, perhaps there is a certain common vision, sort of, as it were, trying to emerge.
And I also got the sense that part of the reason they came was to actually show others in the region who might be thinking, well, this democracy thing, does it work? Should we give it a try? Well, it can work, and here's an example of where it worked in our region. We're not sort of saying this is United Kingdom or France or Germany or somewhere else. This is in our own region, and it worked. Absolutely,
and to some extent, this is going to be a statement to the world.
Yes, indeed.
The fact that they came together.
Sure.
Yes, you see, we are doing things together.
Quite.
Look at this successful transition. We did it.
That's right. We didn't need the UN or USA or EU to lean on us. We did it ourselves.
Absolutely. That's the endorsement, wasn't it? In the beginning, they endorsed what we had decided. Yeah, they endorsed and that sort of thing. We are fine. We are internationalists, but still our interest is really our focus.
Indeed, yeah, sure. So a good one. And let's hope a sign of things to come in the region in terms of democratic transitions. Thank you for that. And now on to a completely different subject, sport. Now, if you've just come from Mars, then you probably don't know what I'm talking about when I tell you that the Scorpions stung the Eagles. Everyone else who is into sport or who has been on Earth or in the West African sub-region probably knows what I'm talking about. I'm talking about AFCON and Gambia's unbelievable performance. Have a look.
In a group including Angola, DR Congo and Gabon, Gambia have gone on to become a revelation in the 2021 AFCON with a statement of being contenders, not just participants. The underdog tag has become a blessing for the West Africans, stinging the Carthage Eagles when it hurt most. Again, Ablai Jallow with a goal deep into stoppage time. Jallow beautifully chested Musa Barrow's fine pass before hitting it with power and called it into the roof of the net.
You know, I was actually tempted to spend the whole of this show just talking about the Scorpions and their unbelievable first appearance at AFCON, but I resisted that temptation, and I'll tell you why I was tempted. BBC, Al Jazeera, CNN, when it was confirmed that Gambia had qualified, that was what they led their sports with, was Gambia's success story, the unlikely success story. What a story, Mr. Mboj. The journey continues, the adventure continues.
Absolutely, throughout. I mean, at some point I was frustrated, telling them, oh, stop doing that. Every time, oh, your lowest ranked country in the tournament, Africa's smallest country. I mean, always this condescending language.
It's about context, though, isn't it?
You know, stuff like that. So that's it. So it has sort of amplified the achievement. The achievement, big time.
Yeah, quite.
And our football style. Yeah, quite. You know, you would think that, oh, these people, they're going to very soon, they'll be overrun But then it doesn't happen. Yeah. And suddenly you see a sudden injection from our side, and then before you realize it, we have free kicks and hitting the woodwork.
Twice in one game.
Goals, twice
in one game and once in another game hit the woodwork. And of course, Ablaye Jallow there, 93rd minute. And it was almost the last kick of the match, so there was no coming back for Tunisia.
At all.
And what's amazing is that a side like Tunisia, champions in 2004. We're not talking about a small country, and in fact, favourites to win the group, and yet they just scraped through to the last 16. But for the Gambia, I mean, this must be an inspirational journey so far for anybody in the country who's into football. And in fact, what I would say is that many people told me I never usually watch football, but this has really drawn me to this. And it's been that kind of thing, hasn't it?
Absolutely. For one, records are there to be broken. Whatever was there before, that is what it is. Sure. But this again, stuff like this, football, it brings out the nationalist in you.
It really does. It really does.
It does.
People would have seen me wearing my Gambia T-shirt on Facebook and on Twitter and in the studio, to present shows, because it was that sort of thing. We were all swept along with it, and we really hope that it continues. And I like the way Coach Tom Sanfier has kind of defended the fact that he didn't pick certain players either in the starting 11 or, in fact, in the squad. He said there are players who are probably the best, but they wouldn't have fit into the system that I wanted to play. And that's quite a brave thing to say, because you and I know the fans have been screaming, why didn't you pick this person, why didn't you pick that person? But so far it seems to have worked.
Yes, I think he wanted to create a club mentality,
this is it.
Club football mentality,
yes.
And you can see in the way they play.
Yes.
There's a game plan. Whatever you say about it, there's a game plan. And it seems all the players know what to do.
There's a certain discipline.
There's a certainty,
and
discipline,
a certain style that they stick to, and everybody knows their role.
They know exactly. And you could see with the Tunisia match in the second half.
Yes.
Secondly, realize what happened.
Yes.
So you know when to stay back, when to come forward,
Yeah.
and you're like, there's a certain togetherness amongst these people,
Sure.
and they all seem to know what they're doing.
Indeed.
Wow, this could be an interesting adventure.
It really could, and let's hope it continues all the way to the last week of the competition.
You know, when the goalkeeper saved that penalty,
Yes.
said, the stars are aligned.
Absolutely, and that was quite a, excellent save, and in fact he ended up getting man of the match. Because of that save mainly, and a couple of other saves that he pulled off in the game. So all round, we've had good performances from the midfield, from the defence, and the forwards, of course, who've scored some cracking goals and have really lifted our spirits. And I remember after the Tunisia game, even though Gambia had already qualified because of the points they were on, to defeat a country like Tunisia, who needed to win to be sure, or a draw, was amazing. And here outside our offices at Kairaba Avenue, people just spontaneously spilled out onto the streets and were dancing.
Absolutely. I think at some point the coach could smell blood.
Yes. And go for the jugular.
Absolutely, go for the jugular. I think at some point in the second half, they suspected that might happen.
That's right.
That was how they created the chance. They had few chances
earlier,
but all wasted. But this one worked.
It worked.
That's the nature of football, difficult.
It's fantastic. So Scorpions, we hope the journey continues. And also, just say in closing, a kind of big thumbs up also to Comoros. Who are, also this is their debut, and they're also through to the round of 16. And in fact, it's the first time ever 2 debutant teams have made it through to the round of 16. So we've had instances when 1 gone through, but not 2 in the same AFCON. So fantastic.
Yes, we're having to tear up the old books.
Absolutely. Rewrite the history books. Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Mboj. And now another change of tack. We've just been through election campaign and of course a presidential election. Well, it's all going to kick off again. What am I talking about? National Assembly elections. Have a look.
A press release from the Independent Electoral Commission, IEC, reveals that candidates' nomination for the National Assembly elections will be conducted from the 5th to the 13th of March 2022 between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. at the respective regional offices across the country. The IEC also says nomination papers from the regional offices will be available from the 4th of February 2022. Election House also revealed that the campaign period for the election will start on the 17th of March and end on 7th April 2022.
Starts in March, ends in April, Mr. Mboj. There's one huge factor this time that wasn't there previously. You and I know that's the President's Party, NPP, likely to be a big player, likely to cause quite a few disruptions if you look at the map in terms of constituencies and how people voted in the recently concluded presidential election. So quite something to look forward to.
Oh, absolutely. That's the fear in many ways. There are some people, that's the fear, and you have others, that's what they will love. They said for Barrow to do, he worked more efficiently, with ease, as it were. In 2017, it was UDP, was it, with the 31 out of the 53.
That's right.
But we all know what happened since.
Yep.
And all the rest, all the other parties, 4, 5, and that sort of thing. One sort of gets this sense that NPP will perhaps score a 31 and only there's 5, 4, 3, 2, that sort of thing. One gets the sense that that's what you're going to have.
And as you rightly say, that can be a good and a bad thing, because we saw what happened in America when President Obama could not get a lot of his policies through because he was faced by a Republican House. And so, if you have that here, where, essentially you have a president and then the opposition are not in his party, they can thwart all his plans. But, the other side of that is that if you have the party whose person is the president as also the majority party, they just rubber stamp everything. And that's not a good thing necessarily.
Absolutely. So that balance.
Yeah.
How do you get
how do you strike that balance?
How do you strike that balance? I don't know. In our situation, perhaps one would just simply appeal to whoever is going to be a member of parliament. It is your conscience, isn't it? In everywhere that's said, you've seen sometimes. Let your conscience be your guide. Let your conscience be your guide. Yes. We are seeing in Britain right now, I mean, a lot of Conservative Party members are giving Boris Johnson problems.
Absolutely. Many have broken ranks and they've come out, they're not behind the scenes, but publicly to criticize him. Yes.
So that's it. There must be that sense of honor and the idea of representation. Remember Edmund Burke's distinction between the trusteeship concept of representation
or delegate.
And the delegate.
Quite.
And we think that the trustee bit is better.
Yes.
You use your judgment, you allow that creative space and a sense of honor.
Yes.
Then you hold your government to account. That is the patriotic, that is what will benefit the nation.
And that's what we want, really.
Yes.
Yes. And so anybody who's watching, who's thinking of, I want to become a National Assembly member, I think that is what we have to, and that's what people have to ask of them. If we vote for you, what will you do? How will you behave? And I think these are the questions that they need to be put to them.
That's our big time. I mean, this is the new challenge, and we should be very watchful who we vote into power.
Sure.
I'm going to vote into power. Somebody who knows what the score is. It's really about time. Enough is enough.
Well, indeed, yes.
You know what I mean?
Because, we've seen in the presidential election also, there is an appetite for voting, the highest ever turnout in a Gambian election. And we suspect it might be similar in come the National Assembly elections.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I think there will be a fair indication of how many will come out. And this time, of course, local considerations will matter a lot.
Well, this is it, because you have to appeal to people locally and not just to the kind of the grand vision of what the sort of national vision is. People will have local concerns, and if you can address them in a way that is convincing, then they'll probably vote for you.
That's it. And just as what we've seen with the presidential, some high caliber people, stepped forward.
Sure.
Be it Ismail Assise, Safal, Abdullah Jammeh, some kids.
Yes.
I hope we see a similar caliber stepping forward to be in the National Assembly.
That would be fantastic.
That would be fantastic, because we've been complaining. We've seen the equality. We don't need to. I don't need to wish to be disrespectful. But with respect, we've seen higher quality.
Well, let's be honest. I mean, I was here in the Gambia when, I remember Halifa Saleh getting up in the House to say, Madam Speaker, can you please tell members of the House that it is Attorney General, not Attorney General? I mean, so let's be blunt and let's be honest. We want a sort of better caliber of people to represent the local interests on that national stage. For sure.
So we will see what sort of people will put themselves forward.
Sure.
Was it merely just for the highest office, or are you genuinely politicized?
Sure. Yeah,
are you truly interested in politics?
Yes.
Because there's no greater burden, no greater pride than to serve in the National Assembly where you make your laws.
This is it.
So
this is it. So
we
I think one to watch. So if anybody who's a potential voter is watching, that is the kind of standard to which you have to hold these people to before you give them your vote. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. And now on to our fifth story. Again, another change. Recently in the High Court, General Saul Badji appeared. And that was a shock for many people, because this man, once upon a time, was probably second in power only to ex-President Jammeh. What happened to him? Have a look.
Lieutenant General Saul Badji, Major Landin Tamba, and Warrant Officer Class 1 Musa Badji are detained at the Mile 2 Central Prison in Banjul, just days after arriving from Equatorial Guinea, where they had lived with ex-President Jammeh for the past 5 years. Lawyer Sirif Kumba Job for Saul Badji and Co. said Saul Badji and the two others are detained at Mile 2 without any criminal charges. The case came on Monday for the first time before Justice Zainab Jawara Alami of the High Court in Banjul. The state filed an application seeking a court order to keep Saul Badji and the two others in detention for 90 days to permit and facilitate further investigation pending the preferring of formal charges. Lawyer Sirif Kumba Job, in his preliminary objection, said the application lacks a basis in law, saying there is no legal basis for the application, there is no law to support the application. Lawyer Job argued. The court gave him 2 days to file his brief of agreement in 2 days, whereas the state is equally given 2 days to reply.
Mr. Mboj, I mentioned Lieutenant General Saul Badji and the kind of power that he used to wield. I can recall when this came on the news, how colleagues in the office acted with incredulity. Saul Badji being brought to court like this. Tell me more. Because you were here. I never lived through that. I came and visited over 15 years or so. So it was different. I wasn't somebody who lived here, but for those who lived here, this was quite a shocking
towards the end.
Yes.
Towards the end of Jammeh's reign, he was arguably the most powerful after Jammeh.
Yes.
And with the Jammeh Commission.
Yes, indeed.
We saw all the stuff that he was doing behind the scenes, how much of it Jammeh knew or not. That's a possibility, how much he was doing. So extraordinary, yeah. So it seems that things are beginning to unravel in Equatorial Guinea.
Somebody who was adversely mentioned at the TRRC, and you know, in the lead up to the election, I can recall every time the president faced the media, people would ask, would you implement the recommendations of the TRRC? And myself and others, you included, probably thought in some instances and in some aspects it will be taken out of his hands because these people returned voluntarily, but because they had never appeared and given testimony at the TRRC, they can be charged. I mean, the ones who can seek amnesty are the ones who came before the commission voluntarily or under subpoena and gave a statement and implicated themselves and were honest and sought some sort of apology, or offered rather some sort of apology. These people did not, and so they came back. Do you get the sense that they imagined they would not be arrested? Because I was going through the case filed by their lawyer, saying, you know, they have no case to answer, they've returned voluntarily, as if because they've returned voluntarily they should have just been left alone. But that was very unlikely.
Yeah, highly unlikely. They were adversely mentioned in the TRRC report, and I think one of the recommendations is that there should be further investigation.
That's right, that's correct.
Into them. So this was bound to happen. Maybe they were talking to certain people in here.
Yes.
Who are giving them the confidence. Just come and face it.
Come back and
face it. Are you going to run forever?
Yes, is it. I mean, and I think some of them, people can't overestimate the fact of being away from your home in another country. You might be living in a certain amount of comfort, but it's not home. And this lure of home can be quite a strong pull, and sometimes you come and you say, you know, I'll face the consequences. Who knows? I might get off. I might be found not guilty.
Absolutely.
And so you take your chance.
Absolutely. I haven't the slightest doubt that that's possibly one of their plans. We realized that, what was it, 24 or 25, 24th and 25th of December,
that's
two
right.
groups came.
That's right.
So what about amounting to what, 14?
Yes.
So they've just decided to come and face their destiny, whatever that might be. So now, maybe the key thing is, are we doing these things, arresting them, or have we detained them according to law?
Which is interesting, because after they were arrested, I addressed this on another program. The state then asked for 90 days to investigate, which seemed odd. Why not leave them to be in the country and use however much time you need to investigate and then arrest them?
Absolutely.
So it seemed rather curious.
Yes, particularly with these three. I think out of the 14, some have been bailed.
Yeah, yes.
You wonder. I think it is just this.
That's right.
These three,
these three
they just want to detain. Fine, but the arrest in the first place, and I understand that they have not been charged.
That's right. That's right.
And we have, what, 72-hour deadline?
Yeah, quite.
So maybe that's why they've gone to the court to seeking all of these things.
Yeah.
If they're a threat, I'm sure the court will evaluate that.
Of course, yes.
If there's a credible evidence showing they're a threat, yes, we can we can arrest them. But it just depends on what is there. So we'll see what the court
decides.
Yeah, what the court decides.
So we might be discussing this as recently as next week.
Next week, possibly, absolutely.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. And now, after that fifth story, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we will have 5 more stories. So don't go away. Join us after this break.
I am the light goddess. Everything I touch turns into light. I am the light at the end of the tunnel, and my technology is the answer. I am the happiness in your life. I keep you connected, and I am Q-Power. I am Q-Cell. I am Sunibus. We innovate, others follow. Call 111 for more information.
Hello and welcome back. You're watching QTV's The Week in Review with me, Adi Darami, and Mr. Mamodu Mboj. So Mboj, thank you for your intervention so far, I always say, and I always mean it. And now, on to our 6th story. We talk about Gambia being a patriarchal society and how it affects the kind of jobs that men and women can do. This particular one is one very unusual to see a woman doing in the Gambia. What am I talking about? Have a watch.
An article by The Outlook on Indian women drivers shows that women drivers are often faced with comments like, "If you're driving, I need to check my insurance. Will you be able to reverse the car? And what about parking?" amongst others. I have been in a vehicle where the car in front was slow and the driver had to ask if it was a woman driving. Fatu Sane told us what keeps her going despite these comments and even worse comments.
I always wanted to be a driver, and I believe that jobs shouldn't be designed for specific people or for specific sex. As long as it's job and it's legal, I can go for it. I have inspired a lot of women who usually tells me they want to be like me, and I wish they could do the same thing I am doing.
Mr. Mboj, in that report, our colleague Jennifer Sonko mentioned something. She was in a car and car in front of her. I have to be honest, I've been in a car and I've heard those comments when, you know, the person driving in front is slow and they say, oh, it must be a woman driver or something. But this young lady, determined to be a taxi driver, and she stuck to it. And she says, you know, women come up to her and say, you know, you're inspiring me. So
absolutely
quite brave in the Gambia.
Yes. The sexist attitudes.
Yeah.
I remember when we really had it. You know what I mean? It takes work.
Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah. We grew up in a culture that is like that.
Of course.
So you have to become self-aware
Sure.
of these things, then you know what you can do about it, as they say, to clean the common spots.
Indeed, indeed.
So this is it. So yes, why not? I remember, was it 2007? A friend of mine had a company, a taxi company, had a fleet of BMWs.
Right.
The drivers were women.
Here?
Yeah, in this country.
Oh, right, okay.
So a lot of stuff has been going on.
Yes.
And now the space that women have and girls, let us be honest, there's still there's a huge disparity, but relative. If you compare it to past generations, I mean, when I compare it even to my mom's generation, and to my grandmom's generation, I mean, this is how we must measure these social movements, this natural movement, you know. So, absolutely, why not? We're seeing women everywhere now.
Well, this is it. And
Salima, was it on Tuesday? Salima, what's her name? Mukansanga.
Yes, quite.
Refereeing in the male
in AFCON. Absolutely right.
Absolutely.
And just on Friday, the new leftist president of Chile shocked everybody. 24-member cabinet, 14 women.
Absolutely.
It never happened in the country's history. And so, you know, these things happen. But in the Gambia, you know, we look at our National Assembly, hardly any women. And jobs like job like this, hardly any women. And people may remember, if they've been watching QTV over the last couple of years, we did one, a woman, I happened to be walking down the street and I saw 50 men on a building site, and there was one woman there. And so we stopped and actually ended up interviewing her and bringing that story on. So there are certain jobs that still seem to be kind of gender defined, particularly here in the Gambia.
Oh, big time. And things have been very slow here. So the fact that we are getting singles, one here, one there, another one there, that's how the doors open.
Sure.
But there's no denying that we've been very, very slow.
Sure.
But I'm hopeful in the sense that I think the gender stereotyping, it's really losing a sense credibility in our own heads.
Yes, sure.
That is where it begins. I think that is a good thing.
That's a good thing.
So how young girls, when they're growing up now, how they would think, how they would conceptualize themselves, it wouldn't be as before.
Yeah,
they wouldn't see.
Things are changing.
Things are changing. Yeah,
and changing for the better.
Changing for the
one
better.
might say. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. And now on to our seventh story. They say, and it's true, that water is life. And a young man has been advocating for, better policies needed around safe water. And you spoke to him, Mr. Mboj, and you'll tell the viewers who weren't also listeners to Q Radio what that young man had to say. But have a look at this clip and it'll give you an idea.
The right to water and sanitation is a human right and stands on equal point with any other human right, social, economic, political, or civil. This recognition means an entitlement by the individual to access sufficient quantity of safe water for personal and domestic uses, and to access safe sanitation respectful of human dignity.
Samboj, we heard Mr. Bonge there. I am genuinely, and I'm not saying this for effect, I'm genuinely shocked at some of the stories we've done here on QTV, on the news particularly, where we've gone to communities and we see what they're having to use as drinking water and water for cooking. But Mr. Bonge had some very, very interesting views when you spoke to him, because you kind of put it to him, well, what is it you're proposing and how do you think this is going to be achieved? And what did he have to say?
Yes, with him, well, in the end I had to push him. I said, what you are saying, because he acknowledged the improvements. When you look at UNICEF,
indeed,
really, apparently now 90% of Gambians have access to water and sanitation, water and hygiene, the WASH. It's a WASH initiative.
Yes.
But yet, he said 1% still have open defecation.
That's right.
And yes, in today's day and age, there shouldn't be even that.
Not even that percent.
Let's be honest as well. And apparently only 30% are practicing hand washing and using soap and detergents and that sort of thing.
Which we are aware of.
Absolutely,
because
we are
the message was really pushed home because of COVID. And yet it wasn't observed. I mean, as we said at the start of the whole COVID saga, shops and businesses had these wash stations outside, and sometimes when it was empty, that was it. They didn't refill it, and people didn't say, well, I'm not going in because I can't wash my hands. They just went in anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then when you look at the statistics, they represent the national average, the national figures. That's but when you disaggregate them, things are worse in the rural areas. That's it, things are worse. Yeah. So part of their project, as it were, their aim, is to really close the gap when it comes to this wash initiatives, sanitation, water and hygiene in this area. And fantastic. We should have more of these things to put pressure not just on government. This is
yes, and we keep saying that it's not just government. I mean, business has a role to play, other agencies have a role to play, charities have a role, and the community too.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is the key. But we have a habit of just sitting down, pointing the finger, it's that one is wrong, that one is wrong. When it's not really true, we cannot solve the problem, because mostly when you say that one is wrong, probably you are not that different from that one. You might be like that. It's just that you are not in the position.
Indeed.
Once you were given the position, you probably do exactly the same thing that person is doing.
Sure.
So this is really what the problem is. But constantly talking, constantly coming with initiatives, community action groups. Sure. Maybe there should be more of those. The focus on action here. Community action groups. Not just lobbying government, but coming with action-oriented initiatives.
Sure. Let's hope that works.
That sort of thing, yeah.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. And now on to our 8th story. Councils from across the land have been, I was going to say dragged. They've appeared before Select Committee, and some of them have been taken to task. Here's a report about just 3 of them. Have a look.
Here is Mustafa Bacheli, the Chief Executive Officer of the Banjul City Council, and Bakari Trawale, the Director of Audit for Municipalities and Councils.
Well, first of all, I want to make a clarification, and this relates to the last audit report for 2019, which we unfortunately have not got yet in terms of its draft. And I think the audit department will be in a better position to attest to the fact that we still have yet to receive the draft copy of the audit report.
Just as the CEO rightly said, the report for 2019-2020, the audit report for 2019-2020 is not yet finalized. It's still work in progress. But I want to remind you once again that the 2017-2018 for BCC are already finalized but not yet discussed.
Mr. Mboj, that particular session was Banjul City Council, Mansa Konko and Janjambure. But we could have chosen any, Basse, Kerewan. They've all been, and most have been found wanting in one way or another. And you and I have talked about this again on other programs, mainly on Drive Time, on Q Radio. A good thing. They're being held to account.
Absolutely. And the familiar pattern, wasn't it?
Yes.
Money unaccounted for, deposit slips
not presented for audit. Yes, quite.
For audit.
Sure.
Procedure, nobody's following procedure, flouting procedure, even the procurement compliant, because they had to be
going to a single source without going through
all sorts of things. Sure. But this is what we suspected. This is why we said we need institutional reform. One understands the council, but in all likelihood, when you go to most public institutions, you'll find exactly the same malaise.
Yeah, quite. So, yeah.
That's exactly it. This is why we need institutional reform.
Sure.
The accountability mechanisms must work.
Yes.
Without that, no policy will yield what you want it to yield.
Well, this is it. And the interesting thing about this is that the sort of accountability mechanisms are there on paper. But until they started dragging them in front of select committees, nobody was scrutinizing them to this extent and holding them to account to this extent.
Absolutely. And we hope that when they publish reports, Those who deserve to be punished should be punished.
Indeed.
I mean, we have to set certain examples, as it were. Not everything is negotiable.
Sure.
We tend to think that almost anything is negotiable.
Some things should not be.
Some things shouldn't be negotiable at all. It's a categorical imperative. We don't argue about it at all. So that will also depend what happens out of this. We are doing what we can. We are publicizing it. In fact, we've been following all the reports and talking about it.
Indeed.
And then what next? What is going to happen?
And that's what we will be following, the what next. So
Absolutely.
Yes. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing it. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. And now on to our ninth, our penultimate story. And this time it's about MLK Day. What's MLK Day? Martin Luther King Day. Have a look.
Today we celebrate and honor the life of Martin Luther King Jr. because of the efforts of the then Democratic representative from Michigan 4 days after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. John Conyers took to the floor of the Congress to introduce legislation for the federal holiday commemorating King's life. Conyers' idea was not supported by many whites for King's objection of the Vietnam War and his ideas that were seen as Marxist.
Martin Luther King Day in America, it's a national, it's a public holiday, but it was quite a fight to get there. And people are saying that this is kind of somehow sanitized the man and the fiery character that he was. What's your take on that?
Yes, from what, 1968 to 1986. Quite interesting there. They just transpose the numbers.
Exactly, that's how hard the fight was. Yes, to get the day. Yeah.
Absolutely. This is an interesting one. It's important that we mark him.
Sure. We
mark Martin Luther King Day. Sure. So the ideas of equality, justice, they're still alive.
Yes.
So it's important to mark it that way.
Sure.
But again, when you look at what's going on in America, what is the substance? The symbolism one understands, marking is the symbolism. But what is the substance of Martin Luther King's views?
Yes.
The equality, the fight is still on. Nothing has been won.
Well, this is it. And I'm glad you mentioned that because we've been sent a report by our CISE, who was an intern here at QTV, and she's back in America, and she's working for one of the Fox News channels. And she's just sent us a package a couple of days ago about a symposium that was put for attorneys who were vying for post of district attorney. And they held it on Martin Luther King Day because the person who organized it wanted them to address elements of justice and equality through the eyes of Martin Luther King. And he said this is the only way it can make sense, is that if you look at what he was fighting for back then, they're the same things we're fighting for now. So what are we going to do to change it, to live up to the ideals that he tried to get America to live up to?
Look at Black Lives Matter.
That's
all part of the fight. It's a civil rights movement still. That's all part of the fight. So I read another writer in the Guardian newspaper saying that, I mean, especially when you look at recent American politics, particularly from Trump and
era.
He said, America spent the last few years, I mean, stamping on.
Trampling everything.
Trampling on the, Martin Luther King's ideas and ideals and all the rest of it. Can't you see Black Lives Matter? Can't you see what's going on? The disparity is still huge.
This is it. I mean, this is somebody who, Martin Luther King forced Lyndon B. Johnson, who took over after Kennedy was assassinated, to sign the Voting Rights Act.
Absolutely.
We're talking in my lifetime. There were places where they could still stop black people from voting.
Absolutely. It's extraordinary.
I was 9 years old when that was signed. So, we're not talking about 100 years ago. And yet Trump and the Republicans are actually trying to unravel some of those things that were in the Voting Rights Act because they didn't like the way the vote went in the last election. So the fight is still on.
Absolutely. And it also tells you that whatever we've gained recently, as you said, not that far ago, is only skin deep.
Skin deep.
Deeper America is something else. I mean, I don't know, from 1776, it took until the 1980s to recognize one portion, one section of your community as human. Essentially, that's what it is. So the deep-seated racism is there. And some of them, they don't even see it. It is quite bizarre.
Well,
white people do not see that they're racist. They don't know what that means.
Well, I don't know if you know of a Republican sort of commentator, Candace Owens. She's very well known, kind of legendary. She's black, and she posted a tweet which went viral about 3 weeks ago. She said, "There was never racism in American politics until Obama came along." I think we'll stop there, Mr. Mboch. We have one more story, and time is our enemy. But that tells you how deluded and nonsensical people can be. And she was being serious, by the way. And now on to our 10th story. The pandemic was meant to have hit everybody, and everybody supposedly suffered. But not, apparently, the world's 10 richest men. No women in the group, by the way. Have a look.
Oxfam based its findings on the Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report and the Forbes Billionaires list. The study uses the value of individuals' assets, which include property, land, and corporate shares, minus debts to see out people's worth. Tech corporations such as Amazon, Google, and Facebook saw a huge increase in profits as more people worked from home and did their shopping online. The paper's authors are calling for curbs on extreme wealth via progressive taxation, proven inequality-boosting measures, as well as a power shift in the economy and society. However, the reality of that happening seems far away. It is often quoted that the poor are always with us. Now, it seems we should add, and so will the rich.
There you had our colleague Lolly M. Camara. I spared the viewers the figures, Mr. Mboch, but I'll spare them no longer. 53 billion combined before the pandemic, over $1 trillion those men are worth after the pandemic, because of course the type of businesses that they own or run. So it's been a boon for them when everyone else has been suffering.
Oh, absolutely. The tech companies, because of the lockdown, everybody was in. What did you do? I mean, you are on your own mostly.
I'll tell you what, a remarkable thing, on my way to work this morning, I switched on the radio, and there was a report about Netflix. Netflix, because people stayed home and watched movies and et cetera, their value had increased 20%. However, because they issued a statement in Wednesday of this week that people shouldn't expect a similar rise in the coming year, the value fell by 20%. It was it was a lead story on BBC Business. But if we go back to the likes of Amazon, Google, and so on, this was a godsend for them. Pun intended, that the pandemic came and suddenly everybody was having to transact online, buy things online, buy goods online instead of going to the shops and so on. So if you had an electronic or a tech business, it was a fantastic boon.
Oh, absolutely. Every emergency, as it were, creates opportunities.
Well,
as it were, for some, as it were, some would go down and others would go forward. But this is it. So, but you know that there has been this argument for a very long time, the top 1%. How much is this doing to the body politic, as it were? There's a lot of resentment because there's so much poverty and right at the bottom.
And that came through in the Oxfam report, because they talked about this kind of almost a punitive tax on these men. As I said, it's 10 men, there are no women in the top 10. But that is very, very unlikely.
Kind of, but how would you get your security? You see, you've got millions and millions at the bottom there seeing how rich you are. So how is it sustainable? I mean, we are told that capitalism is very clever. It makes certain changes within itself. Remember when the welfare system came, there was a need that it needed to address. And perhaps there's another need because you're even beginning to hear certain words, certain concepts from certain corners.
Yes, revolution.
You're wondering.
Yes.
Look at the Conservative Party, for instance. Indeed. The follow scheme, the spending, the very enemy of
capitalism.
Of capitalism. So new necessities.
Sure.
Will necessarily force them to make certain adjustments.
And it will be interesting to see, because essentially what you're likely to get is some of them will do it voluntarily. You have the likes of Bill Gates, who's given away billions already to various causes that he supports and various initiatives, including initiatives run by the UN and WHO. But most of them seem to spend it on what one might call frivolous pursuits, buying ever bigger yachts and space rockets.
Yes, you mentioned Gates, and even Warren Buffett as well.
Sure.
He also does some good things, and he said actually championing, he agrees with these richest people paying more tax.
Sure.
He agrees with stuff like that.
I think we'll end on that point. The richest people paying more tax. Time has caught up with us, Mr. Mboch. And so to our viewers, I'd like to say thank you for watching. But Mr. Mboch, once again, thank you for being on the program, and thank you for some good comments there. And until next week, goodbye from me. Goodbye.